In an article from Rock Paper Shotgun written by Jeremy Peel on April 20, he interviewed Arkane founder Rafael Colantonio and discussed the development of Deathloop. During the exchange, Dishonored 3 was mentioned, which, according to him, Bethesda, their publisher, was not interested back then and instead wanted something that's roguelike and have multiplayer elements. By the time Deathloop was released, Mr. Colantonio already left the studio, and the future of the series is still uncertain. Every now and then, as I observe and have discussions with people in the comment section about Dishonored, this question of whether it's possible for Arkane to make another game for the series or not gets brought up. Despite what the developers have said in Q&As and interviews, this kind of decision-making is susceptible to change and therefore not worth speculating about. Instead, the more interesting question is there room for another Dishonored game? In this video, I'm going to explain why the answer to that is yes, and I may have some idea on what the story could be about. As mentioned in previous videos, the tail end of Dishonored lore can be found in its third book titled The Veiled Terror, written by Adam Christopher. In his Reddit Q&A last 2016, we have verification that the books were written in close collaboration with Arkane, and all included content is canon. With that said, what's interesting about book number 3 is it introduced several new problems that were left unresolved by the end of the story. Here's a quick summary. Void rifts, which Billy Lurk believes to be dangerous, started appearing across the Isles and are slowly expanding in size. At the same time, a lot of people are having terrible nightmares in their sleep and have become so desperate to find relief that they started messing with magic. These two are compounded by the fact that the Abbey of the Everyman has been violently disbanded. I talked about it in detail on this video, so if you haven't seen it yet, I will leave a link down in the description. Suffice to say, these are not your typical minor loose ends. They are major issues that have world-changing consequences if left unsettled. So if Arkane is no longer interested in making another, then it's kinda strange that they'd leave the saga in such an odd predicament. Problems like these are meant to be tackled as part of great storytelling. The only rational reason I can think of for why this happened is that they were placed there on purpose in preparation for something. This is why I'm convinced that there's room for at least one more game, and these are part of its critical foundation of what that story could be. All of the ones listed here, including a power crisis theory which I briefly discussed in this video, leads me to assume that if there's ever going to be a Dishonored 3, then it would be about the civil unrest caused by these problems. We might even be looking at the source behind the decline of the Empire, as revealed in Deathloop. This game, which has been confirmed to be part of its world, according to Arkane Leon creative director Dinga Bakaba, is set in a future where what happened is exactly that. Although it's an alternate timeline, it still means that Arkane is actively pondering on the future of the series. When we think about it, the very existence of this game is proof that the developers are still very much invested in Dishonored, possibly a lot more than meets the eye. In Chapter 4 of The Veiled Terror, it is mentioned that Emily and Corvo went on a diplomatic mission to Wagon, an island northwest of Tivia. Unfortunately, the book never expounded on this, so whatever important event that transpired there, which compelled the Empress and her royal spymaster to go themselves instead of sending a delegate, remains a mystery. Even the very existence of that island itself is quite interesting. It's not on the official map and was only appended when it was briefly mentioned on a note found in Dishonored 2. Why would Arkane add that additional landmass if it's not so important? I have no answers to that, but what we do know is that Wagon's officially part of Tivia's territory, and at this point in the timeline, they have become wary of Crystal. It was revealed in the first book that the Corroded Man was recruited by Hiram Burrows, Dunwall's royal spymaster, in a plan to bring Tivia closer into the Empire. He was supposed to lead a revolt that would eliminate the High Judges, and become the solitary ruler of Tivia loyal to the crown. But after Empress Jessamyn's assassination, he was sold out by Burrows, now Lord Regent, to the judges and was sent to prison. So if the power crisis does happen, and or these ongoing troubles progressively get worse, is it possible that Tivia might see this as a sign of a weakening empire and use it as an opportunity to start vying for their independence? There's certainly a historical context for it. The ruling party almost got overthrown. If they're successful, then the known history from Deathloop takes over. Tivia becomes a sovereign nation called the Motherland and starts experimenting with Black Reef Isle until we reach the 1960s and Deathloop begins. One historical tidbit that I initially assumed could be used against this thought exercise was when Delilah Copperspoon usurped the throne. Tivia sided with Morley in questioning her legitimacy, which could be seen as a sign of their loyalty, but is it really? If Emily failed to secure the throne, both territories would have joined forces to invade Bristol. There are several scenarios of what could happen after that, but one thing's for sure. Since the Empress doesn't have an heir yet, then the crown has fallen either way, so it's a convenient means to an end. In any case, you can see where I'm going with this theory. Deathloop happened as the outcome of a bad ending in our theoretical Dishonored 3. As far as I can tell, the last known entry in the Dishonored timeline is on 1854, the end of the third book, while the earliest entry in Deathloop is on 1911, Colt Van's birthday, and by then, the Motherland was already established. So Tivia's attempt at secession happened somewhere in between those 57 years, which I also think is when our next game would take place. It's also worth mentioning that withdrawing from the Empire is an act of treason that usually results in armed conflict. So it's very interesting to note that at one point in the Motherland's history, there is evidence that they went to war. I mean, who else would they be fighting against other than the Empire's forces or those loyal to the crown? Even if I get it wrong, the possibilities of what Dishonored 3 could be is rife with ideas. In my view, it's not a question of if it could happen, but rather, when would it be greenlit? With some of the key elements in place, the chances of that game materializing is quite high. As long as Arkane stands, and the renowned IP still has something left untold, the next main entry is always a possibility.